don't I hop in then? Cool. So, like I said, we're talking about Barbarian, which is from 2022. I almost said 2023. I'm like, I know it's the end of the year, Gabe, but calm down. Um,
We're here.
we're still here. We're still here. We got a few months. Barbarian from 2022, and it is about a woman staying at an Airbnb discovers that the house she has rented is not what it seems, and it's directed by Zach Krieger. Um, yeah. So that's what you get when you're when you're talking like when you watch the trailer. It's like Airbnbs. Oh no, which
Mhm.
was reluctant to watch it because of that because I've seen that film and
Yeah.
it was fine. It was not
Yeah.
my favorite film. So I was like, "Oh, is it gonna be that again?" Nope, nope.
Yeah, what this one was just, like, unexpected the entire time.
Like, whatever you think, it's not, okay? Just stop.
Yeah.
So Barbarian is a new and original horror movie that has shooketh the horror community. And like I said, it's created by Zach Krieger, who is a former member of The Whitest Kids You Know, and I was slightly hesitant to watch it because of that.
Yeah.
Like I've watched Whitest Kids You Know, not all of it holds up. There's some parts that are funny, but I was like, oh no, uh-oh.
Yeah. Mhm.
Oh, however, I do think that comedy creators at the helm of horror makes for some great scares and fun and a fun time, like
Mhm.
Jordan Peele, right? Because it really does well of setting that up and letting you release, and then sprinkle in a little comedy so you can relax.
Mhm.
Um, the biggest thing about this film is that you shouldn't know anything about it before you hop in. So, like I said, uh, I highly, very seriously ask that you watch the film before listening to me unpack it. It is available on HBO Max and Hulu if you have the HBO subscription thing. So
Mm.
go there and watch it. Ask for someone's login. Like, please go watch it because there is so much I can say about this film and a few different themes that I could unpack. But this is our episode about haunted towns, so I'm going to try and steer towards the haunted Detroit rather than the feminist undertones. I'm going to try.
Okay. If you end up talking about both, I think it's okay, you know? I'm gonna
It's
talk
kind of
about
hard
the
not
down
to.
aspect a little bit, so it evens out, evens out.
Yeah, it's gonna be what it's gonna be.
Yeah.
So please, like again said, please watch it because there is spoilers. It's not like a lot. I try to keep it a little loose, but I have to because of
Mhm.
what happens. And one of the biggest like parts elements of it is that you come in with your own like feelings about the
Yeah.
characters and the situations. Like you got to come
Mhm.
in fresh. So the film opens on Tess, a young woman in her car on a rainy street. She scrolls through her text of an email containing the lockbox code for her Airbnb. The situation seems normal as she mumbles the code to herself, though it is wrong, before trying to unlock the box for the key. When she does get the box open, the key is missing. Luckily and strangely, someone is in the house and opens the door for her. Scary. Red flags. And so the trailer's teasing begins with essentially that. So who is this guy and what is he doing in her Airbnb? Is this an
Mhm.
Airbnb horror movie? It is and it isn't. It's better than any Airbnb horror movie you've seen because it actually is talking about the issues of Airbnbs. Anyway,
Yeah.
Bill Skarsgård plays Keith, the current guest of this double booked Airbnb. And Tess is a new final girl fave for me. Her gut and initial reaction to presumed danger really resonated with me. Like how she reacted to a lot of things, I was like, yeah, I feel that. There's a
Right
lot of her
response.
like,
Yep.
immediately Tess is on the fence about this handsome stranger, and the audience is also wary of him thanks to the seller casting decisions because we cannot trust Pennywise.
Yeah.
Uh, Bill Skarsgård has played villains, even in a film called Villains. Okay, like it's on. Like you come in, like I
Thinking,
don't care how
yeah.
cute you are. So she takes many precautions and isn't shy to let him know she is uncertain of him and cannot be played. She doesn't drink his tea. She calls hotels for rooms. She checks his reservation confirmation, takes a photo of his ID, and sleeps in the room with a lock on the door. And throughout the film, Tess behaves like any final girl should, aware of the dangers in our world and cautious of her place in it. Her only flaw, we'll come to know, is that she is too kind.
Yep.
She cared too much,
Yep.
and could be just because she's not from here. Like she's not from Detroit. She hasn't lived in this like environment that can contribute to it. But she is too kind. Uh, Keith tries in all he does to put Tess at ease, and in those attempts, he fumbles nervously. And he is aware of her discomfort and caution, but every time he tries to dispel those worries, he only reinforces them.
Yeah.
Like his constant insistence of his goodness and trustworthiness makes us all the more wary. Um, if you have to say it, like
Yeah.
then like you're I think thus protest too much.
Yeah.
Like, and she didn't drink the tea, like I said, so he remarks on that and tells her that he can watch her make another cup, and he like insists that she drink this tea, and you're like, "What's in the tea?"
Yeah.
you know, uh, and then he doesn't open the wine until she's around, hoping that she'll have a drink with him, and you're like, "Why you want her to get drunk?"
Yeah.
And all the while, his awkward attempts at genuine care come off as sinister because we cannot trust Pennywise. And it's not until he reveals who he really is, which is a member of a jazz collective that has been buying up blocks of homes in Detroit to make affordable and accessible living spaces for Detroit artists, and she softens up to him.
Mhm.
Though, as an audience member, I felt like this was too convenient, given that she was in Detroit interviewing for a position as a research assistant for a documentary about this very collective. Coincidence or
Yeah.
carefully laid out plan for human trafficking?
Yeah, it was very, like, fresh, like, yes, and, you know what I'm talking about? Where he's like, "Oh, that you said that? I also love that thing," or
Yeah,
like, "I am also very conveniently aligned to whatever the thing you're doing is, to
yeah.
earn trust."
Like part of like a little, it's a little more than like advanced than that because it was so specific and he offered it up first,
Uh-huh.
like those details. But like, because he is like, oh, you should interview me, but he knew too much about it. That's why I was like, okay, that seems weird. Like he
Yeah.
rehearsed this.
Oh, he see like, it's planned.
Yeah, that's what it felt like to me, like, oh, they knew she was gonna be here, and so it's
Oh,
like a
that's
whole
so
scene,
scary. Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, that's so
So that's
scary.
where I was, and I was like, "He's just trying to, like, get her to drink this tea, what's wrong with him?" So, in an article on Collider titled Barbarian Ending Explain the Horrors and Resilience of Womanhood, writer Raquel Hallman explains how this interaction and Tess's overall caution sets the tone for the entire film, saying, once Tess and Keith are able to interact on a human basis, she relaxes enough to explain to him how many precautions she had to take before calming down, while he never particularly felt as though his safety was ever in jeopardy. She
Mhm.
even remarks how, if roles were reversed, Keith would have just settled right in without a second thought. The first act does a brilliant job at establishing the female gaze that governs most of the film. Women are often socialized to constantly watch over their shoulder and to regard unfamiliar men with caution. It's the marked differences in socialization and overconfidence in their own safety that brings each of the men to their demise. I was like, yep.
Yeah,
Because
exactly
they don't
that.
have any red flags. Like, they're not like every single time they're met with something that's scary, they're like, whatever, what's that?
Yeah, let
I'm
me
mad.
look at it.
Mad.
I need to see it with my own eyes.
Yeah,
It's
man
like you don't.
angry, like, that's it, like, every time. Once this human connection is made, Tess loosens up and the film takes a sharp turn into romantic comedy. A
Mhm.
montage of the cutest scenes occurs where were this not a horror movie, wouldn't this be a really sweet meet cute,
Yeah.
a story to tell their children? We booked the same Airbnb. It was fate. Like
Mhm.
practically writes itself. So they have a wonderful night, and Tess has herself thinking she may have stumbled into a real life rom com until she goes to sleep. She hears noises. Her door is now unlocked, and she can hear and see Keith twitching and mumbling in his sleep. Is he okay?
Yeah.
Uh, it's okay. Doesn't it still doesn't run into horror territory yet. Like it still is
Yeah.
very much just like, okay, we just been messing with you this whole time.
Yeah.
In the morning, Tess ventures back out to her car after reading a cute note from Keith wishing her luck on the interview. And now that we see the neighborhood in the light, it's even more unsettling and terrifying than it was in the rainy, dark night before. It feels sinister, forgotten, and foreboding. Keith has cautioned her the night before, saying he wouldn't even go around the neighborhood at this time of night, which is saying a lot because he had no
That's a
worries.
fear. Yeah.
And at the time, it fueled our mistrust of him. Like, why is he trying so hard to get her to stay? Was what
Yeah.
it felt like. Like he kept, oh, there's convention in town. Like it really felt
Too
in a horror
yeah.
movie situation, it felt bad.
Yeah,
In a
we already knew it was a horror movie, so our guards were already up anyway, but would have been even
yeah.
more, like, just because we know life.
Yes, and I think if it was a rom-com, we would've been like, "Oh, it's so cute. The
Yeah.
world."
It's a different frame.
Exactly. But in the daytime, we can see why he was worried. And this is not the suburbs. This is a desolate, apocalyptic wasteland. Um, Tess eventually goes to her interview, and it seems to go well until the filmmaker asks her where she's staying. And when she learns that Tess is in Brightmoor, she becomes visibly worried. No one should be staying there. This is one of the hints that something truly sinister is occurring. This abandoned and broken neighborhood seems to have sad secrets. The
Yeah.
horror movie kicks in finally when Tessa ventures to the basement to find some TP, and she gets locked in and soon discovers a hidden hallway to which she promptly nopes before eventually final girling her way to see in the dark. Which
Yep.
I was like, that's what made her my favorite. She's very resourcul. Like she set stuff
Yeah.
up and she was like, I'm not just going in here, you know?
Yeah.
It was really giving Erin from Your Next, but like
Oh,
on a
yeah, yeah.
regular person scope, you know? Um, so now that she's set up a way to see in the light, she's rigged this mirror to reflect the light into this spooky hallway. She stumbles into the secret space to find a truly horrifying room. It's dirty, contains only a single stained bed, a video camera, and a questionable bucket. When she is freed from the basement by Keith, she is shook.
Yeah.
Panicking, she begs Keith to leave, and he brushes off her fear. She must be hysterical. What I'm not gonna get upset because of a bucket.
Oh
He
my
reasons
gosh.
that a strange room with a bucket and camera is not enough to send him running. I don't know why not, but okay.
Yeah.
It ain't that deep. I don't need to stay any place for any reason. Like, what? When he goes to investigate, he begs her to stay in case he gets locked in, and Tessa's folly begins. This is when
Yep.
we truly see that she's not full final girl.
Yeah.
She's a little too much.
Too
Um,
nice, as you
when
said.
he's yeah, exactly, poor thing. He's gone for far too long, so she goes to find him, leading to a new secret tunnel leading further down. Because why not? You're like,
Yep.
"Don't why are you going down here?" Even she's like, "Why am I going down here?" For this
Yeah.
one day, like, "What are we doing?" Um, and in this horrifying tunnel, she is very clearly terrified. This is another thing I really appreciate about Tess was, like, horror final girls get scared, sure, and they do a lot of screaming and running, but she was, like, genuinely scared.
Yeah.
No, I was like, "This is valid. This is exactly how you react if you're wandering down into this tunnel." And every time she sees something scary, she's like shaking and she's calling for Keith and she's like, "Where are
She
you?"
just keeps looking back like, "I wanna go back. That is the
Yeah,
right decision here. I should not be down here. I am consciously choosing to do the wrong thing," and she's aware of that
yeah.
the entire time.
But like fights that to
Yeah.
save him.
Uh-huh.
And you think it might be, oh, because they have chemistry, but it's not the case. She just really cares about people.
Yeah.
So she sees all these red flags. There's a lot down there. And after a truly harrowing encounter that will leave you pondering what this movie is actually about, the film snaps over to an entirely new character. It's
Yep.
just like, oh, okay, what? That's the, oh no. And then, what? What are we doing? So Justin Long is in this film. You might not know that because it's not in the trailer. And
Yeah.
he plays AJ, who is the owner of this Airbnb, who was flown to Detroit after being accused of sexual assault. And he looks to sell the place to pay his legal fees. Um, he was another character I was really worried about.
Yeah.
But it's okay. Trust me, I was very nervous. Um, he is nowhere near a hero at all. He is very
Yeah.
villain. When he arrives at the house to find traces of another human's presence, he isn't scared or worried. He's angry. It's very specific, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't have those cautions of like, what if they're still in here? It's like, how dare you be in my house?
Yeah.
Which was like, are you kidding me? Your house? You didn't even know, like, you forgot about this house. This
Yeah.
isn't your house. And I'll talk about why that's even further a problem. Um, he is continually the worst, but his behavior towards the discovery of the secret rooms is what sets him apart from Tess. Instead of acknowledging the red flags and creepiness of the basement and secret tunnels, he, like Keith, brushes it off. Neither of them conditioned to be wary of their surroundings or to be on guard.
Yeah.
He's like exponentially worse,
Yeah.
but he's also like not gaslighting her because he hasn't seen her.
Yeah.
So We're given quite a bit of comedy to relieve the stress. My favorite scene being the tape measure
Uh-huh.
situation. Very good.
Where he's like,
If you watch the
"More
film.
land for me to manipulate and
My
exploit."
favorite is when he sees, like, the cages. He's like, "What is that?" And then,
Yeah,
like,
just
it's
totally forgot
so
about it.
good.
It's
And
so
it's, like, comparing that to, like, when Tess was down there and the true horror that she was, like, that you could see on her face, like, all of, like, she's like, "This is the wrong decision. I should not be down here. This is so bad." Versus this guy who's like, "How much money can I rip
yeah,
people
like,
off of?"
literally at no point was he like, "That cage could be for me," because he has never felt that that was a possibility
It's
for
yeah, he until now has never been held accountable for his actions.
Mhm.
So AJ eventually runs into the villain, the not my villain of the story, known as the mother, and the film spirals back into horror. And it's I there's some just desserts in there.
Yeah,
Some, oh, you don't like it when your body is being used for something that you didn't want it to be used for?
yeah,
Oh, is someone using it? Like a little bit of that. You get a
yeah.
little of that. And it's nice. Um, as horror antics ensue, the film does another pivot and takes us back in time to Reagan era suburbia Detroit. Because why not?
Good film. In the
And
film.
so good. And here we learn of the real monster of this film, Frank, a serial uh what is a word we could say here? Serial
Assaulter?
assaulter and killer who's been abducting women, hiding them in his basement, impregnating them, and then impregnating those babies when they're a little older. Um, which eventually leads to what we know as the mother.
Yeah,
She's an inbred woman who comes from a monster.
yeah.
Um, so again, not the villain, another victim.
Yeah.
Uh, cannot be blamed. We are introduced to Frank as he leaves the home of the Airbnb, only now the neighborhood is bustling and it was his house. Fresh cut green lawns, the sounds of children laughing, and the radio informing us of Reagan's plans to fix the economy follow us on
Oh.
our drive with Frank.
Yep.
So you're like, oh, okay, okay. This glimpse into the past further contributes to the atmospheric horror and shows us a different character affected by the horrors of the film, Detroit,
Yeah.
which is the real victim. The film takes place in Brightmoor, a real neighborhood in Detroit that, much like its film counterpart, is falling apart. It's haunted by its past and has fallen victim to the city's housing crisis. And just as the daylight revealed the misshapen husk of the neighborhood, so too does the film highlight a very real problem. And in a different Collider article, thank you, Collider, for all your really good pieces, titled Why Barbarian's Brightmoor is the Perfect Symbol for Detroit's Housing Crisis by Andrew Mengel, the writer explains the connections. In fact, a new University of Michigan study estimates that 37,630 households in Detroit are living in spaces neglected and wrought with dangerous maintenance issues. 13% of its households are living with exposed wires, broken furnaces, or lack of running water. So turns right into a story that tells us exactly what's going on. Um, what was once a robust and flourishing neighborhood, much like the one Frank stalks his way through, is now a vacant, barren landscape of boarded up homes and pink demolition slips. The article explains that Brightmoor was a working class neighborhood of immigrants and Southerners that did fairly well during the then booming automotive industry of the 1920s. Um, so it started off pretty good, and it was primarily people of color, or people coming up just to find a better way of life. And so, thanks to Dodge, Chrysler, and Ford, the city had had the fourth biggest economy by 1920. And Mengel explains according to Data Driven Detroit, there are approximately 70,000 vacant households in Detroit with an overall 20.7% vacancy rate. And it's not just Brightmoor. A Google search of Detroit's most abandoned neighborhoods leads to others like Gricksdale Farms, Westwood Park, and about a dozen others, all of which note over 25% vacancy. That's a big chunk
Wow.
of an entire population that all these houses just desolate.
Mhm.
Um, in the film, Frank reluctantly catches up with a neighbor who explains he, like much of the neighborhood, are packing their bags. The neighbor loosely explains the departure as the neighborhood is going to hell, without specifying the need to leave. However, during this time, the 1980s, Detroit was experiencing a phenomenon known as the white flight, spurred by racial tensions, which is what Kat's going to talk about.
Yep.
Um, Essentially, this resulted in the city's white families leaving for the suburbs of Michigan, leaving the city desolate and abandoned, and a prime environment for ne'er do wells like Frank to prey on his victims.
Yeah.
Um, just leaving it to be. So, Kat will talk more about how Detroit is haunted specifically, but what also contributed to the desolation of neighborhoods like Brightmoor was the late 2000s global recession. This led to a decrease in car sales, which for a city reliant on car creation was hit hard by. And Mengel goes on to explain how the consequences rocked Detroit, and the city's commerce titans like Ford, General Motors, and Pontiac laid off thousands of workers and led to a 25% population decrease. With auto factory layoffs, workers migrated out of the city, deserting their homes and deserting Detroit, leaving the city a gray field. The city's once famous structures like the Grand Ballroom, Vanity Ballroom, Packard Automotive Plant, and the Lee Plaza Hotel still stand vacant as of the writing of the article. Further, the film's other villain, AJ, represents another issue that has contributed to the haunting of Detroit: short-term housing, such as Airbnb and Verbo. Um, People are buying property for low rates and renting them to temporary visitors, which the effect of short-term housing, the housing shortage, and recent inflation numbers have ballooned housing prices in America and have peaked mortgage rates to the highest they've been in 12 years, says Mengel. Apparently breaking all kinds of city ordinances, AJ further harms the community, saying, AJ's disregard for city ordinances and failure to maintain his property represents the disarray the short term rentals have imbued on the housing market. For instance, in Detroit, an Airbnb property must be the host's primary residence, and the
Mm.
property must be inspected and reapproved by the City of Detroit Buildings, Safety Engineering, and Environmental Department, which we know is not the case for AJ because
'Cause
he
he
lives in
does
LA.
yeah, he's also, like, never really been there ever.
He's never been there, and it was not inspected and pre-approved because they would have saw the infinity basement of murder
Yeah.
and torture, like, clearly.
Yeah, somebody would have found that.
So just contributing to the harm, because now you're just inviting nobody's here, like,
Yeah.
these are people who are not gonna build or respect this community.
Mhm.
Here for a minute. Another piece of the housing crisis represented in the film is actually the existence and portrayal of the unhoused population of Brightmoor. Andre is a character who is unhoused and first serves as a warning for the neighborhood. Still wearing our typical horror movie glasses, we are terrified when Andre appears and he chases Tess into the house when she returns from her interview. It
Mhm.
is broad daylight, and this unhoused man is just yelling at Tess to leave. And she is like super terrified, running in, closes the door, locks the door. It's like, oh, good. I was also worried about this.
Yeah.
She is still on edge from the cautions of the normal horrors of an unknown town, and this experience shakes her further. So she calls the police, only to be dismissed, and they tell her they simply don't have any cars that can help her.
Yeah.
Well, the unhelpful police appear later in the film, only to further upset you and highlight why we need to abolish them in the first place. Hey,
Yep, and
Cat.
my section has a lot about that, so
They are such a problem. Which is why I was like, that's like a whole other tangent that I could go on. Like the fact that they like totally dismiss her because they think that she is just another unhoused person, like
Mhm.
not deserving of their protection, that, whatever. Um there's so much to say in this film that I'm just like, I have to focus on the Airbnb.
Yeah.
So, um I was really worried about Andre's appearance in this. Just as I was worried about AJ's portrayal at first, I was fearful that the film would fall into some harmful stereotypes and rhetoric. But Andre is a hero, and he is one of the few folks left living in this husk of a town, and he knows of the horrors happening below. His yelling at Tess wasn't in a fit of mental duress, but rather a true warning of the house's evils. He
Yeah.
later helps to rescue her and scolds her for caring about the others. Essentially, like, you need to get out. Like, you need to protect
Yeah.
you. They're dead. That's it for you. And his existence as a hero, as the lone resident of a crumbling neighborhood, showcases the more direct and realistic harm the housing crisis has on the population, which I really appreciated. One of the many things I appreciate about this film. So, like I said, there's much to unpack in this unique and absurd film. For me, one of the pieces that stuck out the most was the neighborhood. Having seen and experienced a neighborhood hauntingly similar to this one, I felt just as spooked by the daytime desolation as I did the abrupt horror in the basement. Frank, Mother, and all the horrifying events that occurred underground were a direct result of Detroit's housing crisis. The abandonment of this city, ripe with history, like, we could talk about jazz and Motown
Mhm.
forever about Detroit, right? Has been gutted, allowing for monsters to thrive below. And as the article continues on, through Google Maps Street View or a drive in the north side, the real horror in Barbarian isn't exclusively found in the basement. And the closing thoughts of an article on Den of Geek titled Barbarian Suburbia is Still the Scariest Place in America by Joe George helpfully sums up why there aren't really any heroes in this story. While AJ's property mongering brings him to his much deserved ends, our hero our heroes Keith and Tess aren't completely innocent either. After all, Keith has come to Detroit to purchase cheap houses he and his collective will use for artist residences. Whatever the virtue of his motives may be, he's still a white man taking advantage of suburban blight to amass houses for his collective, which could be used to help unhoused people and create local communities. Tess may not be white or a man, but she's hoping to help a director who uses these spaces in her documentaries, even as she condescends them. Like,
Mhm.
we literally see that. While less openly exploitative, Keith and Tess take advantage of the benefits offered when AJ rents out the house and ignore or outright fear unhoused people living in the area. And for me, the true victim of Barbarian is Brightmoor itself. And in the end, no one is here to save it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's and it's like it's one of those things because it's like in my section, I'm gonna be like, wow, it's like so horrible though. And I'm talking
Yeah.
about like the past, like not past passes, and I'm talking about like far, far away, but like I'm not talking about the 80s even. I'm going further back than that. Because that's like all kind of what sets up the precedent for what you see in the film. Even like it explains thoroughly. I mean, obviously you expect the police officers to blatantly ignore her and be awful. But like after I think like there is obvious reason why they don't take her serious in addition to just thinking she's an unhoused person. It is
Hmm.
clearly blatant racism as well.
Yeah,
And like
absolutely.
it's the city of Detroit, much like other cities in America, has like whew, heavy, heavy history specifically with that police in general.
Yeah, I mean, just the audacity to see a person and think they're below deserving your help as someone
Mhm.
who's like that's supposed to be your job, which is again the root of the problem, or one of the roots of the problems with the police force. So yeah, like there literally should be not a single person that is undeserving of help, even if she
Yeah,
were unhoused and were like intoxicated, under the influence, suffering mental duress. Any of those are not reasons to not deserve to be protected.
yeah.
Period.
Mm,
That's it.
yeah.